Welcome back to Beyond the Script. I am your host, Nikki, and this is a podcast that talks about intuition, identity, the spiritual side of entrepreneurship, and some other things in between. Today, we are going to dive into dissolving the identity that is keeping you in a loop. So, what does it mean to dissolve the identity that's keeping you in a loop? And what exactly is an identity loop? So, an identity loop is something that I like to call it when we are consistently in a pattern of either starting and stopping or making progress and then reverting back to old ways or anything that doesn't align with where you're going. Whenever we get back into the cycles that we wanted to break by reverting back to the way we used to do things, that is what I call an identity loop. And so I say to dissolve the identity because what does it mean to dissolve something? I want you to really think about that. Think about if you're mixing up like a drink, right? You're putting a flavored packet into your water. You pop it in there, you mix it up, and it dissolves. It's not that it completely goes away, but it transforms into something else. It transforms into, well, in this instance, a flavored drink, right? It transforms into something. And so I like to say dissolve the identity, and I can't take full credit for that. I heard somebody say it, and I really just liked it, and then my brain took it to metaphors and analogies and all kinds of things. But I like to say dissolving the identity now because we don't get rid of identities. You can't erase the past. You can't erase past versions of yourself. But what you can do is you can evolve them. And so when we dissolve that identity, we allow it to exist in a different form within us. We allow it to turn into something else, right? So if you have an old identity that is still playing on a loop, and I'm going to use a drinking identity as an example for this one. If you've listened to my episodes, you know that drinking is like the one identity that I always come back to because it's a very relatable one for me. So let's use the drinking identity, right? You have the drinking identity versus the entrepreneur identity. And this is not to say that you cannot drink and build a business. I'm not implying that whatsoever, right? I know plenty of people do it. But for the sake of this, we're going to use that example. So let's say you have the drinking identity and then you have your entrepreneur identity. And let's say you're the type of person where when you drink and you enjoy drinks and maybe you have a tendency to sometimes overdo it, or it has a tendency to where the drink does not sit well with you, it makes you tired, it makes you lethargic, it makes you not fully ambitious. And you recognize this and you're like, okay, if I want to be the type of entrepreneur that I want to be, then I need to remove the drinking identity. That is, a part of the thing, right? So you're like, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a break from drinking. Okay. That's not necessarily dissolving the identity, but now you're playing around with if that identity fits you or not. And this can be used for any identity, any habit that you're trying to break, anything you're trying to get out of. And so you take your break and you start to you start to get a glimpse of a different identity, the version of you that is the entrepreneur who doesn't drink versus the entrepreneur who does drink now, right? Now we're getting into these different identities. And what you're realizing is you perform so much better without drinking. Your entrepreneur identity is flourishing, your ideas are flowing, your execution is happening. Like you are just doing all of the things that you set out to do. You're not foggy anymore. And you do this for X amount of time, 3 weeks, 30 days, 60 days, whatever, right? You haven't completely sworn off drinking. You're playing around with identities. Then you are like, okay, I want to play around with the drinking entrepreneur identity. So you go back. You go back, right? You're like, let me try it. And in trying it, you realize that identity does not sit well with you anymore. You're back to being lethargic. You're kind of, half-assing some things in your business. You are skipping out on some of your tasks, right? Different things like that. And so now you have data of these two identities. And you're like, okay, I'm done drinking. It doesn't work for me, right? I can't do it and be an entrepreneur. But what happens, and this is not just in drinking, this is just the example, but what happens is when we decide that the old identity is no longer serving us, that the old identity is not something that we can take with us, The ego, for one, fights to keep it, fights to keep it relevant, fights tooth and nail and says, remember me, remember this identity. We've had so many great times, right? And your new identity or your evolving, emerging identity is like, hey, I can't fully flourish with this identity hanging around. So now you're in what I like to call the identity loop. You are one foot in to this, sober entrepreneur identity, and you're another foot into the drinking identity. And you're in this in-between phase where you're like, okay, I can see where my sober identity is going to take me where I need to go, right? I can see where it's going to take me, where I need to get to. I can see where, it's my next move, right? But then you hold on, you said, I'll drink again one day. I'll have it again one day, right? And when we do that, the identity doesn't dissolve. It is still there, clinging on to hope, right? And so we have to learn how to dissolve the identity. And I'm not going to lie, drinking was an extreme example because there's definitely easier identity loops to dissolve. But, we decide like, you know what? I don't drink anymore because I am a 7-figure business owner. Even if it's not true yet. That's the identity you're stepping into, right? The identity of a 7-figure entrepreneur. And so if you're stepping into that identity, what can and can't you take with you? In this instance, you can't really take alcohol with you. You can't afford to have a foggy day. Okay? At least not right now. And so you have to dissolve it. You tell yourself, I don't drink anymore, right? Until you believe it. Okay? Until it becomes believable. And this, like I said, I use drinking as an example. This can be done with anything. Let's use fitness as an example. You are like, I want to cut out fast food. I don't want to eat this anymore. I want to have the dream body, the dream gym body that I've always imagined, right? But you stay in an idea of when I achieve this body, then I can have fast food again, or then I can have, desserts again, or whatever it is, right? Well, we're not dissolving the identity. We're putting the identity on hold. But when we put an identity on hold, instead of allowing it to completely evolve, what ends up happening is we stay in a loop because now we have one foot in our new identity and one foot in our old identity. And because the old identity knows that it's allowed to come back, well, it's going to try even harder to come back sooner. It's going to try to make an appearance sooner. This is why in fitness, for example, we will see people like absolutely kill it in fitness. They get the body that they wanted, whether that's, gaining muscle, losing weight, gaining weight, whatever it is, right? There's no one rule in fitness, but they get what they wanted out of fitness. And once they got it, if they haven't dissolved the old identity that did not get them here, you will see them go back to old habits. And when they go back to old habits, then when these old habits emerge and the old identity comes out, well, then it shows up in the way their fitness is, right? It shows up in their physique. It shows up in their habits. It shows up in their eating. It shows up in all kinds of ways. And people will like to say like, oh, I fell off. I had a hard time. Yes, that's true. But what it really comes down to is you never dissolved the identity. You never embodied the person who either doesn't eat fast food or who, doesn't drink anymore or who, whatever it is, right? You never dissolved that identity. You simply put the identity on hold until you were ready to allow it to emerge again. Have you ever experienced this? Think about it. Have you ever accomplished something that you set out to accomplish and then sprinted back in the opposite direction? Went back to how things used to be. Went back to old actions, old beliefs, old habits, whatever it is, right? That is an identity loop. It doesn't really matter how long it takes. You can be in an identity loop daily. You can be in an identity loop weekly, monthly, yearly. The thing of it is, the old identity emerges when it hasn't been dissolved. And so I gave an example at the beginning of the episode and said, when you dissolve an identity, I want you to think about putting a packet into like water, right? To turn it into some form of flavored water. It dissolves right in there. When it dissolves, it exists in a different form. Okay. So when we think about an identity, an old identity that we're ready to release, we can simply dissolve it into a different form. For my moms listening, when you become a mother, the old version of you still exists. You're still you. You were a woman before you were a mother, right? The old version of you still exists. It's not gone, but it has evolved. It has dissolved into motherhood. So now you're still a woman, right? You still have the same interests, the same, some of the same patterns as before, but you've taken on this identity of motherhood. And so now the previous version of you has dissolved into motherhood and still exists, but in a different form. And so because it still exists, but not in its exact form, you then get to invent how it exists now. What if we're taking the flavored water packet example, what flavor is coming out now? You see what I'm saying? So if motherhood is water and your old identity is a packet, then you pop your old identity into the water, it dissolves, it, turns into the flavored water. What flavor is it? See, you get to choose that. You get to choose how that identity emerges. You get to choose what it dissolves into. The biggest struggle I see with this, the biggest like heartache or the biggest tests, I hate that word tests. Scratch that. I did not say tests. The biggest struggle that I see with this is it's simply that we don't want to allow the identity to dissolve. We want to allow the flavored packet to exist and the water to exist and all the things to exist separately. But what happens when they exist separately? Sometimes they conflict. Sometimes they battle each other out. Sometimes when your identities exist as separate entities and you don't see them all as a part of you, then you start to have conflict within. The big part of internal conflict that we have is simply our identities like kind of going to war with each other. If you want to hold on to your drinking identity or your fast food identity while also wanting to allow a sober entrepreneur, a sober seven-figure entrepreneur to emerge, or, a fitness physique dream body to emerge, well, those are going to be conflicting identities. Those are going to kind of battle it out, right? So you have to decide what identity is actually going to stay, and then how do we dissolve that other identity into the new one? When we keep playing trauma on a loop, for example, we simply haven't let go of that identity that keeps it stuck, that keeps it at the forefront. Because, and I hate to sound so harsh, but trauma has happened to everybody. But when we keep replaying the trauma over and over, all we're doing is going back to the moment that it happened instead of being in the moment of now. And the reason we go back to the moment that it happened is because we haven't let go of the identity. We haven't dissolved the identity that experienced the trauma and allowed it to emerge into something different. And that's not to dismiss what the trauma was. That's not to dismiss what anybody has experienced by any means. But when it's keeping us hindered, when it's keeping us on a loop, we have to look at it for what it is. It's something that happened that we have to figure out how to dissolve and move on to, or move on from. The identity is already within you. So how can we transform it so that it becomes the evolved version of your identity to help you where you're going, to not keep you stuck on that loop, but to propel you to where you're meant to be? Okay. And that is the biggest challenge, is allowing these old identities to dissolve, because, and I've said this before, oftentimes there is a grieving process. Humans don't like to feel grief. We don't like to feel sad. We don't like to feel grief. Some of us don't like to feel angry, right? We shun these emotions out. We shame them. We think that we're wrong for feeling them, and we're not. The thing that we're wrong in is trying to avoid them, because then that prolongs the situation. Versus if we just accept the feeling, in this case, we'll say the grief of an old identity. If we just accept the grief and accept that, hey, that version gave us some great times, but I can't take it where I'm going. I've got to dissolve it into this new one, and I got to keep moving forward, and I got to push past it. And yes, it is a little bit painful, and yes, it does hurt. And yes, I do sometimes wish I could go back, but I can't. Well, then we move on from it a lot quicker. Then it's like, okay, that identity existed. She no longer exists, and we're moving past that. We're moving into what we're meant to move into. And that's the other challenge, is you don't necessarily know what your new identity is. You haven't, she hasn't emerged before. So now she's emerging. Now you are having to, rediscover yourself, so to speak. And that can be uncomfortable. That can be something that you also want to run from, because you've never been this person before. We don't like the unknown. Humans do not like the unknown. You see a scary movie, it's all like going into somewhere that's unknown. It's like, you go first. No, you go first. No, you go first. Because we don't like what's unknown. We like familiarity. We like predictability, which is the most ironic thing ever, because nothing in life is actually predictable. Yes, we can get into mundane routines, but a curveball can come out of nowhere at any moment, right? But we love predictability, even if the predictability is chaos. And that's why you want to hold on to your old identity so bad, because even if it's causing you chaos and pain and discomfort and, essentially ruining your future plans and all the things, it's still predictable. You can subconsciously predict that the identity that you're holding onto that's no longer serving you is going to give you chaos. And you've become so dysregulated that chaos is a comfort. So you cling to the comfort in the chaos, which is why your identity still exists when it should have been dissolved a long time ago. Which is why you haven't moved forward to where you need to go, because that identity is still causing you a comfortable chaos. This is the identity loop. This is what's keeping you 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards, because you step into the new identity that you're ready to emerge, that you're allowing to emerge. Then it gets uncomfortable because it's unknown. So then you revert back to what a comfortable chaos was, or a familiar pain, or whatever it is, because even though it sucks, it is what you know. Which is why we have to dissolve the identity. Yes, that's what we know, and we no longer need to feel that way. Yes, that's what we know, and it no longer serves us anymore. Yes, that's what we know, and we need to allow new to emerge. We need to embrace the unknown. We need to allow the identity to dissolve and become something new. So that is today's episode on dissolving the identity and getting out of the identity loop. So if you are listening and you're like, man, I have been in this identity loop before, I don't even know how to fix it, how to start it, anything like that, I first challenge you to let go of the identities that aren't serving you. Let go of the identities that are keeping you in a loop. And I'll give you an example of an exercise that I did before. But when we dissolve an identity, if you don't know, grab a notebook, first of all. Grab a piece of paper, grab a notebook. If you don't know what your new identity is going to look like, if you're like, I can't even fathom it, but I just know that this current identity is not serving me, then write out everything that you're ready to let go of in your current identity. Because that will at least give you some sense of direction on what is coming next in terms of what you don't want to go with you anymore. Okay? So start there. If you want to dissolve an identity and you don't even know what this new emerging identity looks like, start with the things that you want to release first. And then do everything in your power to dissolve that identity, and know that you don't have to hold on to these pieces anymore, and that you get to allow something new to emerge. Okay? So if you've made it all the way to the end of the episode and you're like, I really want help getting out of these identity loops, I need, some guidance on this. For one, definitely subscribe to my Substack. I post almost daily newsletters on identity, intuition, and, business energetics and the spiritual side of entrepreneurship. So I will link that in the show notes to be able to subscribe to my Substack. When you upgrade to a paid Substack subscription, you will get tangible things, tangible exercises to be able to essentially rewrite your identity. That's what I like to call it. So you will be put right into a 7-day challenge to rewrite your identity, and then you're giving tangible things going forward. I do a monthly Q&A on there, so you can always upgrade to a paid Substack subscriber for that. If you are interested in working one-on-one together to get past these identity loops, send me a DM. My username across all socials is at Nikki Lynn Mayo. I will put that in the show notes, but you can send me a DM, see if there's any one-on-one available, and if there is, we can put something together and get you out of these loops, because I, for one, know very well what it's like to be in an identity loop. And I have finally, figured out, after years of trials and tribulations and doing my own inner work, how to move past these identity loops, how to get out of the start and stop process and all of the things. So that is something that I help my clients with, along with, the spiritual side of entrepreneurship and business energetics. And by the way, for my entrepreneurs that are listening, like, entrepreneurship and identity absolutely go hand in hand. And if you have not stepped into, the full entrepreneur identity, you might be finding yourself in a corporate versus entrepreneur loop, right? We can work on that together as well. And then the last thing that I want to say is, if you found value in this episode, please share it with somebody else who you see in the same cycles of starting and stopping, or who have expressed that they feel like they've taken 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, because I would love to be able to help them. And then, like I said, if you found value in this, I'm hoping that they would find value in this as well. So with that, I will talk to you all next Tuesday for next Tuesday's episode. Bye.